Hello, Tinkle Minions. I really like just hanging out with all of yous and, kind of chatting about things and doing casual videos to kind of offset some of the bigger production value videos that I put out as role plays or, kind of experimental type things that can take a lot of time to create. So making kind of casual, chatty videos gives me an opportunity to connect with you and also kind of relax the creative side of my mind and the perfectionist side of my mind also. And still have some fun creating and hopefully helping you all relax and go to sleep as well. So today I wanted to show you a couple of my prized possessions. Some things that have held some sentimental value for me throughout most of my life. And I'll tell you a few stories as well along the way. I'm sure you're not expecting what I'm about to put up into the camera. I am so sure that you are not expecting this, but here goes. This is one of my favorite things. This is, of course, a violin. And I am a violin player. So I will tell you a little bit about this particular violin in just a moment. But first, let me tell you why I play the violin and how that happened. So, I think if I count, I was classically trained for about 13 years, give or take maybe a summer or two. And I actually went to university to study music in violin performance. And I didn't stay in a music major. I did change my major, graduated with a different focus, but I started in music. And I played a few other instruments as well. My second instrument was flute. But my main true musical love is the violin. When I did my audition, you have to play 3 pieces. And I don't remember what the regulations or the requirements were, but if I think about the pieces that I played, because I do remember what I played for my audition, then I think one would have been an orchestral excerpt, so a piece that was the violin part of a bigger piece, essentially, is the simplest way I can put that. One would have been a technical piece, like a study. And then I think one was just whatever you wanted to play. And the piece that I chose as a kind of wild card audition piece was an old Hungarian gypsy melody in E minor. And I still play it to this day. I don't play the other 2 pieces that I auditioned with, but I do still play that old Hungarian melody. And it's kind of grown with me over the many years since I left a music degree to pursue something else. So this was the violin that I auditioned with, and it's become quite a favorite of mine ever since then. So this particular violin, I believe, is German made, and it was made at the turn of the last century. So it would be dated to the late 1800s to the early 1900s. And you can see that the colors are very atypical of an older violin. You will see some very dark, newer violins that have used wood dyes, and they may even have like a colored lacquer over them. They tend to be very inexpensive, but this one is very old. And it's my understanding that at the time, oh, I heard the harmonics in my voice just echoed in the body there. Interesting. So it was my understanding that the luthiers, or the violin makers at the time, were experimenting with putting potassium permanganate in their varnishes. Now, a very light coat of a varnish with potassium permanganate in it would create sort of a light brown, a very warm color, but a very strong coat, something very concentrated, would turn the wood almost black. And so this particular specimen obviously had quite a concentrated coat of this varnish. It has been kind of beat up a little bit. Mostly before I had it, I've taken very good care of it. There are little kind of imperfections in the finish. But it's a stunning piece. And the back is the same. So that's the story of this violin. Now, I don't know who may have had this violin previously. My father bought it at an auction. Most of our instruments when I was growing up, myself and my siblings, we were quite a musically active family, and almost all of our instruments were bought from auctions, which is kind of a unique way to collect musical instruments. The house was full of them. Closets that were usually dedicated to cleaning supplies became instrument storage facilities. There were dresser drawers that had instruments in them, or pieces of instruments. It's a very eclectic collection of instruments in the house. So the violin that I learned to play on originally, that I had for probably 10 years, was red. And I think it was just a Chinese-made, very basic, maybe 40, 30-year-old instrument. But I always had my eye on this one. My twin sister learned on this one. And I loved this one. But I had to stick with the red one. But this one's mine now. Instruments can almost take on their own personality. And this one is very mellow. It's very bassy, and it's very harmonious and deep, and the sound resonates inside of it. There's my voice in it again, I can hear it. So they almost have a personality. And your fingers will start to know the fingerboard very well. So there's actually grooves worked in this one a little bit from where my fingers have played the instrument. So you can get to know an instrument almost as if it's a person, which sounds strange to say, but you can tell if the instrument is warm or too cold, or I feel like even if I haven't played the instrument in a while and then I take it back out, it's as if it doesn't trust me anymore. And so I have to kind of, play a few ballads first or something like that, something slow. And then it will kind of warm up and the tone will come back. So that may also be a reflection on, technique kind of lapsing as you take some time away from playing. But I also like to think that it's kind of a personality that the instrument has. So I will show you a couple of my other instruments, but first, let's do a little anatomy lesson because this is something I know very well. So up here at the top, this is a scroll. This is only a double, and these are typically hand carved in a quality instrument. Some of the kind of mass-produced beginner's instruments these days are machine-made, but these, and this one in particular, since this is such an old instrument, it was carved by hand. So you'll see little differences from one side to the other. And some instruments are triple scrolled. So that's even more detailed. It will have one more circle inside of the scroll. It doesn't really serve a purpose, except that it looks nice. And in fact, some of the violins that you can get now, in particular electric models, a lot of them don't have a scroll at all. So, but I very much am into the aesthetics of the scroll. I think it kind of adds to the symmetry of the whole instrument. So, but I do have an instrument that doesn't have a scroll. I'll show you to you in a minute. So these here, these 4 pieces, are tuning pegs. The ones on this instrument are ebony. Some are maple. You can get some that are plastic, and I assume some sort of resin. So any hard material that can withstand temperature changes, you'll be able to use as tuning pegs. These ones are very plain. There's no inlays, there's no carving in them. Some you'll see at the very end will have mother of pearl. These ones are just very basic, but you can get all sorts of fancy, detailed tuning pegs as well. Now this part here is of course the violin's neck. So this is where your fingers go to create certain notes. And you'll notice that there's no varnish or color on the neck, and that is the way that it should be. And while I've never gotten a definitive answer as to why that is, I think it's because a varnished surface is very sticky, but a violinist needs to be able to move their entire hand to different spots on the neck very quickly in some cases, and certainly very smoothly, so they don't varnish the neck. And then here is where the neck joins into the body. This piece here, it's almost like a rectangle, but it's narrow at the top. That is the fingerboard. So all the way from here to here, technically, you could use your fingers to make notes. It's unlikely that you'll play up here any amount of time, but it does happen. And this piece right here is called the nut. And there are 4 grooves in the nut for each of the strings to go in so that they don't slide around on the fingerboard or slide off of the fingerboard for that matter. So there's a little notch there to keep it in place. Now, of course, on top of the fingerboard are the strings, and a violin has 4 different strings. So the string the closest to me is the E string, the thinnest one. It is the highest pitch on the instrument for an open string. And the next one down is a little bit thicker, and it's called A. Now, if you have any sort of background or education or experience in music theory, then it may occur to you that that is a particular interval. That interval is called a perfect fifth. So the interval between A and E is 5 steps, and we call it a perfect fifth. And a perfect fifth down from A, which is our second string down, is D. So the third string over is D. And then the lowest string, the fourth string, and the brunt of many a joke is the G string. So a perfect fifth down from D is G. Once you know what the perfect fifth sounds like, it's very easy to tune your instrument because you always have that knowledge of what different intervals sound like. That comes with experience, but if you have the tone of one of these strings, say for example you have an app on your phone that helps you to tune your instrument, or some metronomes have a tuning function and it will play a particular note, and you'll be able to tune all of your strings off of that one note, because over time you will remember what a perfect fifth sounds like. So those are the strings on the violin. Now a little more anatomy. This piece here, this light wooden piece, is called the bridge, and it adds tension to the strings, and it also facilitates the transfer of sound waves that come from the strings into the body of the instrument so that we can hear them. So it tapers. Might be hard to see, but it's thicker at the bottom than it is at the top. And just like the nut, another piece of the violin that ends up being the brunt of many jokes, the bridge has little grooves, 4 little grooves for each of the strings to pass through. Now you'll notice a little black sleeve on the E string here on my instrument, and that is because the E string is so thin that over time it can wear that groove a lot thinner and impact not only the stability of the bridge, but how the sound of the E string travels into the instrument. So that's why there's a little sock on it. So then we have, try and hold it up. This piece here, this kind of triangular piece, looks a little bit like a funnel, is called the tail piece. It serves a couple of functions, but first I'll talk about these 4 pieces of metal right here. These 4 pieces are called fine tuners. So big tuning movements are done with the tuning pegs, but if you're interested in having the ability to create very minute changes in the tone of your strings or in the pitch of your strings, you can use these. And so turning them one way or the other will loosen or tighten the string. So you can make very, very fine adjustments to the tuning of your string. And you can see that the strings are inserted into the tuners. But if you didn't have those fine tuners, the holes that they are in are where the strings would go. So you don't have to have fine tuners on your instrument, but they are helpful, trust me. Now you can see here that the G, D, and A strings on my instrument all have the same pattern at the bottom. And then the E string is a slightly different color. It's more of a peacock blue instead of the blue and black stripes that my other 3 strings have. So the bottom 3 strings are just from one particular brand. I think they're called Parastro. And the E string is from a different brand. Just like guitar strings, there are a number of different coatings and cores that you can get violin strings made out of, and there is a particular brand and any particular type that I prefer. So I always have an odd one out on my E string. This piece here is the chin rest. So it is where you see the left side of the chin being pushed into the instrument, sometimes making a little double chin on that side. We know. Don't worry. We know we look funny. And then this piece here is the end pin. And this holds the tailpiece onto the instrument. So it's pretty snug. It has to be in there pretty snug. Now just a few more pieces of anatomy. These are called F-holes. I wonder why. I wonder what they'd be called if they were shaped like A's. And they allow sound to escape the body of the instrument. And they look kind of funky. And then on the inside, I think you can see it. It's hard to see. There's a little piece of dowel in there. It's only about 2 inches high, called a sound post. And what it does is it creates tension so that essentially, so the top of the violin doesn't cave in under tension from the strings, but also from intense vibration. And it transfers sound waves from the top of the violin into the bottom. And that just makes it, of course, a lot deeper and richer in terms of sound. So a violin without a sound post would still make sound. It would be very vulnerable to damage, and it would be very tinny and maybe quiet. It wouldn't be as rich of a tone. So I don't know the exact mechanics of how sound posts are put in. There are, luthiers, violin makers who specialize in that sort of thing. I just know that it goes under the treble side of the instrument, and the treble would be the higher strings, and that's all that I know. So this is my favorite instrument, my favorite violin that I own, and I will show you my other ones here in just a moment, but this is my prized possession, and I do really hope that I'll be able to keep it and take good care of it for many, many, many years to come. It's such a collector's item, really, but the coolest thing is that it's an instrument that can be played and is played. It is my main instrument. I play this instrument, so it doesn't just sit around and look pretty inside of a case or anything like that. So yeah. Now before I move on to my other ones, I'll just show you a couple of bows, because of course violins are bowed instruments the vast majority of the time. Now I have several bows. None of them are particularly expensive because I do quite a bit of fiddling. I know I was classically trained, but alongside of that I do a lot of fiddling. And so I tend to be pretty rough on bows. Rehairing bows is not uncommon for me. So a bow is a piece of wood. I can't fit it all in my camera frame. There we go. So, the hair is horsehair. There might be an alternative now. I don't think there is. To my knowledge, there isn't an alternative to horsehair. There might be a synthetic alternative, but my bows have always used horsehair. And this is, of course, too loose. You need a little bit of tension in it. So there's a little adjuster down here at the bottom. At the frog. This is the frog. And you can see that there's a space in between the hair and the wood now. I usually bounce it on my wrist, to test the tension, but probably end up coming back and smacking the camera, so I won't do that. So that is a bow. Now this one isn't in too bad of a shape, but let me show you another one. So I had this bow re-haired a while ago. The hairs do fall out over time. They are under tension, and so they will need to be replaced. And I had this one re-haired, and I sent one of my violins, I don't remember which one now, to a luthier to have a small crack repaired. And there are these little, I don't want to call them a bug, but they are a bug. They eat cellulose, and they eat carpet fibers and things like that. They're not harmful or anything, but anyway, he apparently had quite a few of them in his workshop, and one of them got in my case. And it chewed off all my bow hair up at the top. If you can see it. So this bow I can't use. It was freshly re-haired with black horsehair, which cost me more. And then this stupid bug got in my case and ruined it. So it just flops around now. I'll have to get it re-haired again, but it's just been sitting in my case for a couple of years now. Bummer. Now this next violin is still important to me in a few ways, but I really have strong dislike for it. This is my beater violin. So if I am going to be outside, or if I head to the cabin, this is the violin that I take with me, because it is a piece of garbage. It sounds like a tuna can with strings on it to me. It's abrasive and tinny, and everybody tells me it sounds great, and I don't believe them. It sounds like a can with strings on it to me. And it has this awful lacquer on it that's chipping off. And the neck has been varnished. And it's just the most bizarre instrument. I hate it so much. But it's still wood. I don't think it's particularly old. It's been around for a long time. I do know that because this was around when I was a teenager. So that was a while ago. But it's about as plastic as a violin can get. So, but this has still served me well. I've been able to take it out busking. Like I said, anytime we go to the cabin, we want to pull it out and play a few tunes, and it works for that too, and I don't have any worry about it getting destroyed. Because it's not a collector's item. It wouldn't be difficult to replace. And as well, actually, I think I've mentioned in a couple of videos that I was previously in the military. So I spent almost a decade in the Royal Canadian Navy, and this violin used to go with me to sea. I was okay with it if it got covered in salt water, or if it got beaten and kicked around a little bit. It wasn't a big deal. If it had fallen over the side, it wouldn't have been a big deal. So it has been good in that respect, that I can take this pretty much anywhere, and it's indestructible. So anyway, it's a love-hate relationship. It doesn't sound near as good as Black Beauty over here, but whatever. It's even asymmetrical. The end pin is starting to come out. I've had to super glue it back in a couple of times, and the bridge is all warped. It's all pointing down. It's like curved. The fingerboard is off center. See how there's more space of the fingerboard over here than there is over here. It's a quirky little fellow. that's enough of that one. So a few years ago, I had some money saved up and I decided I wanted to buy myself a new instrument. Specifically, I wanted an electric instrument. So I bought one. This is an electric violin. Now you can get electric violins that look like normal violins, but why would you do that when you could have this? This is a violin that was created by Mark Wood, and Mark Wood is a amazing violinist. He does a lot of sort of metal, alternative type stuff. It's hard to describe. Look him up on YouTube. Mark Wood violin. He played and composed with the Trans-Siberian Orchestra, which you may have heard of. I believe he's also performed alongside Luca Turilli and a few other, possibly Yngwie Malmsteen, possibly. So if you're kind of an electrified person, then those names may sound familiar to you. But he has released a line of electric violins, and this is one of these Stingray models. And it does look a bit like a Stingray. So, it doesn't need the body because it has a pickup. It has its own internal pickup system. So, in an acoustic violin, the sound travels from the string into the bridge, from the bridge into the top of the violin body, from the top into the sound post, and down into the bottom, so that there's a uniform distribution of sound waves. And then, of course, we hear that sound coming through the F-holes. But an electric doesn't need that. The sound goes through the strings into the bridge, and then it's hard to see, but there's actually a pickup in the bridge, so the sound waves go directly from the bridge into the pickup system. So you don't need a hollow body, you don't need all of that space for the sound waves to echo around in, and as a result you can shape violins in all these funky ways. He has another one that is shaped like one of those electric guitars from the 80s. It's like the bottom half of a star. I think it's called the Viper or something. It's whack. Anyway. So, this was a fantastic, much deserved, I like to think, purchase for me. And it has been an absolute pleasure to play. It's been very interesting. Now you'll notice as well that it doesn't have a scroll. So, a little bit of a different aesthetic, much more metal, don't you think? So, now, the electric violin, if you play it without a pickup, which you can, it's very quiet. So if I touch the strings of one of my acoustic fiddles, you can hear that from 2 feet away. And I was just very gently tapping the strings. But if I touch the strings of the electric fiddle, it's very quiet, even this close to the microphone. So it is a good practice fiddle for that reason, because it won't echo around. If you wanted to play violin at 3 in the morning, then your neighbors wouldn't hear you. It's great. So that is the electric. Tuned the same way, still has tuning pegs, and I put fine tuners on it as well. Same strings. The only difference is it is electrified. How cool is that? So this is the Stingray. So those were my 3 precious violins. Now I know there's a lot of what's in my bag videos on YouTube, and I feel like part of the completion of this video should be what's in my violin case. So, let me show you. It's not very exciting, but... So aside from a violin itself and a bow or 2, some of my cases have 2 bows, some of them just have 1. There's a few other things that I carry around. Now I usually carry a metronome in my case. My metronome ran out of batteries, so it's not in the case right now. It's sitting on the counter, so I can put a new battery in it when I actually remember to go get some. So there's that, but then there's also a shoulder rest. So holding a violin under the chin without a shoulder rest can be very uncomfortable. Some people do it, but I find it very uncomfortable, so I don't do it. So the shoulder rest attaches to the body of the violin at the back. So it would go here. And it lifts the instrument up off of your chest, so it makes it more comfortable in your neck, and it also makes the instrument a little bit louder because the sound waves are not being absorbed by your flesh. So that is a shoulder rest. There's a number of different designs of them. This is, I have had this shoulder rest for probably 15 years. It's an old Kun, I think it's called. Kun. And I think I bought it for like $15 or $20 back then. It's lasted me this long. I've had to replace the surgical tubing on the corners that allow you to attach it to your violin without scratching the wood. But otherwise, I've had it forever. So I have several of these. I also carry a tube of chapstick in my violin case, which might sound a bit odd, but sometimes if there's been big changes in temperature or humidity, the tuning pegs and the holes that they go through will swell or contract, so they will change shape based on the climate. And if they get very, very swollen, then you can actually pull them right out and put some lip balm on them and then put them back in, and it will kind of lubricate it a little bit and make it easier to tune. So I always have lip balm in my violin case. If you've ever seen a fiddler play, you've probably noticed some dust flying off of their bow or possibly built up on their instrument, a kind of white powder. It's called rosin. There's a little bit on there. I try to keep it clean, but this isn't my main priority for keeping in good shape, so this one does have a little bit of buildup there on the fingerboard. Rosin adds friction to your bow, so it sticks to the strings and it won't skip along or move or slide around. There's a couple of different types. This is one here. It's all fuzzy. It tends to be kind of an amber color. Some of them have like a green sort of hue to them, like this one. Now this is they call this a black rosin, which I prefer. But there are also amber colored rosins. This is a bit on the darker side. Some are very light, but it's the same idea. And so you just rub the bow hairs along them, so you would tighten your bow and then drag the bow through the rosin back and forth, and the bow will pick up rosin on it, and then your bow won't slide around all over your instrument. So you can see there's like a little groove worn in this one where I've used it. I do prefer black rosin, but I probably got this for free along the way somewhere or something. I don't remember. Sherman's Violin Rosin for orchestra and solo work. And there's actually a price sticker on this. It says $7.99. It does tend to be on the cheaper side. It's cheaper than the black rosin. And I think I recognize that price sticker. So I think I know where I bought it. Now, one of the last things that I keep in my case is a mute. So I mentioned that electric violins, because they don't have a hollow body, they don't make as much noise as an acoustic violin. So in my acoustic cases, I carry around a mute, and this fits down over the bridge and in between the strings, and it dulls and mutes the vibrations so the instrument is not as loud. Now you can get little tiny ones like these that sit, they just hook the D and the A strings into those holes, and it slides up onto the bridge and hooks on. This has very, very little muting power. It doesn't really make much change. It's noticeable, but hardly. So that's the little one. Then there's the bigger rubber one. This one really, really mutes a lot more than the little round one because it covers the whole bridge and mutes all of the strings equally. So this is a good little one. The rubber ones are quite inexpensive. And then if you're really, really trying to be quiet because you're practicing your violin at like 3 in the morning in a dorm room, you can get metal ones. So these do the same as the bigger rubber ones, but even more so. It is almost imperceptible to be playing with this. If you were playing, for example, in a bathroom with this on, somebody standing outside the door may or may not be able to hear you. And if they could hear you playing, it would be very, very, very quiet. I remember practicing with this on all the time in my dorm. And then I would go to practice on the weekends or in the evenings at the music building on campus. And then I would take the mute off because all of the practice rooms had acoustic padding and stuff like that. So the sound didn't leak into neighboring rooms. And it was like being blasted in the ears with like a foghorn. The difference. It's so loud. After you take the mute off, it's crazy. It sounds so different. So anyway, I always carry a mute with me in my case just in case. Now lastly, I wanted to share a couple of pieces of music with you that I have either picked up to work on or that I've had for a long time that are kind of unique. So I'll show you those. I have a huge amount of sheet music. It's shameful how much sheet music I have. Some of it is still at my folks' house from like 12, 15 years ago. I have some stored in a box around here somewhere. And then I have a shelf in another room, in a spare room, full of sheet music. I don't know what I'm going to do with it all. As a side note, my spare bedroom holds our studio. So it's like obviously there's like an editing computer in there. That's where I edit videos. We also have some audio software as well. Sheet music and all the instruments and things like that, but we call it the Shred Cave. I just thought you should be aware of that. That my office is called the Shred Cave because that's where all the shredding happens. Yeah. So, this is the newest piece that I picked up. And it's not actually a piece at all. This is called IntelliShred. And it was actually written for guitarists. But because I am such a metalhead, and I truly am, it's not just an act, I am actually a metalhead. I feel like orchestral, like classical music, and metal go really well together. So, I don't think it's a real oddity. So, this is the Thinking Guitarist's Guide to Melodic Mastery. Now, I always had this issue, being classically trained, that everything had to be perfect, you know? And that's all well and good. It's great to have technique and have standards and always want to play something that's harmonious and melodic. But I found it extremely difficult to improvise. I shouldn't say that. I didn't have an issue improvising. I had an issue improvising where people could hear me. So I could improvise on my own, and I really wanted to, and I wanted to learn how to play these mad solos and all that stuff, or like make up fiddle tunes on the go or whatever. And if I played a wrong note, it killed me inside. If I played a note that didn't sound quite right with whatever else it was I was playing along with, it killed me inside because I was so dedicated to this weird perfectionist attitude. And I had a teacher along the way. My violin teacher in university was very, very regimented, and everything was according to this standard and this standard. And in hindsight, that's terrible, you know, because it kind of took that creative approach to things, the idea of making music and putting your heart and soul into it and doing it the way you want to do it for the sake of making music and creating. It turned it into this calculated, dull sort of, well, I didn't finish my degree in music. Maybe that will tell you why. So it's been a dream of mine, now that I have an electric violin, to really, really buckle down and learn some improvisation techniques, or shredding, as we say in metal. So that's where this came from, is I really wanted to dive into the mindset and philosophy behind guitar solos and shredding and see what I could apply to the violin. So I'm excited about diving into this one. Some interesting exercises, chromatic scales and things like that. Little sequences, so I'm excited about that. Hopefully I can get over my perfectionism. Now, of course, I also have a number of fiddle tune collections. Now, some of my tunes I've learned note by note from fiddle teachers, which is kind of the preferred way to learn. It allows you to learn with your ear instead of your eyes, which in music tends to be a good way to do things. But having kind of a compilation is great, because if somebody asks you to play a particular song, or you're joining in with a group of people that you've never played with before, then you may have the sheet music available to make your life a little easier. So this is just one of them. This is the Sky collection of reels and strathspeys. And most of these are from Scotland/Ireland, kind of the Celtic, Gaelic sort of tradition. though I do have a soft spot in my heart for bluegrass as well. Now, along with some of the auction lots that we found violins in when I was a kid, my father would buy most of the instruments from auctions. There were occasionally lots of antique sheet music in there as well. So these are some books that I have used for exercises, but they're also antique, which is so cool to me. Music now, sheet music, is so expensive. So, for example, IntelliShred is listed as US $19.95, but sheet music for some reason tends to be really inflated in Canada. I probably paid close to $40 for this, would be my guess. I know I ordered it online. I'm sure it was close to $40. So that's just kind of a comparison of how much sheet music is now. But this one, for example, there's a sticker over the original price of 75 cents, and it says it's now $1. So this, for example, is The School of 5 Positions for Violin, Book 1, 20 Easy Exercises. This is Carl Fischer's music library. Carl Fischer was a publisher and distributor of studies and books such as these, compilations of studies and scales and things like that for instrumentalists. There's nothing special about these except that it's from 1903. So the binding has started to deteriorate on this one, but it's still in pretty good shape. And it's the same with this one. This is also by the Carl Fischer Music Library. This is O. Shevchik, School of Bowing for Violin, Book 1, 75 cents. So these are just little exercises and stuff. If you don't read sheet music, that's okay. It probably looks like a whole bunch of dots, and that's what it looks like to us too. So don't worry about it. We know it looks crazy. So this one was copyright 1904. So I'll hang on to those. Here's an example from the Oliver Ditson Company. This is Scales and Chords for the Violin, Book 1 by Eugene Grunberg. It's just scales and chords, arpeggios, boring stuff. I've marked a bunch of the ones that I was doing in it a long time ago, but these ones are also antique. Don't know. There's a preface to the revised edition, July 1902. I think it is newer than that, but I'm guessing maybe 1920s for this one. And same with this one, which is Book 2, $1.20. Like, I wish I could be paying $1.20 for sheet music these days. That would be great. Except I'd have even more of it, which is not something I need. Oh well. Anyway, just a whole bunch of black dots. Scales and chords. I used to hate doing scales and chords and arpeggios and studies. I used to hate it. All I wanted to do was play. But now I don't mind doing studies and exercises and things. they certainly are helpful. And lastly, this is from the Schirmer's Library of Musical Classics. This is Kreutzer, 42 Studies or Caprices for the Violin, and this book was 75 cents when it was released. And I have bought a number of pieces from the Schirmer's Library of Musical Classics from their newer releases, and they're $24.95, I think was the last one I bought. So I mean, 75 cents. Some serious inflation going on in the Canadian dollar. So this one is 1923. One of my violin teachers used to make me do this one every single practice and every single lesson with different bowing. I hated it then, but I miss it now. My violin teacher in university, I mentioned, was very regimented and very specific, and it was almost obsessive. It was very strange. But the violin teacher that I had for over a decade before I went to university was filled with so much personality, and she was able to tell by closing her eyes and listening to you play if you were tired, or if you'd had a bad day, or if you didn't like the song, etc. She could just tell. She could close her eyes and she could tell. And she couldn't play near as well or as perfect as my violin teacher in university could. He was part of a symphony and all that professional musician stuff. But she could play, and you would know exactly what she was trying to get across in the music. And she would move and sway as she played. And it was an absolutely joyful experience. And I think that that is what playing an instrument is supposed to be. And there's always going to be bad days. And there's always going to be pieces that you don't want to play or pieces that you struggle with. But as soon as you get past those obstacles, you're able to put your personality into your instrument and into the music that you put out and into the world. So I miss that. And I left music school because I didn't want to be a perfectionist anymore. And I still play. Am I as technically good as I would have been if I'd stayed? Probably not. Definitely not. But I sure as heck have a lot more fun now than I did. So I guess it was the right decision. Well, thank you for hanging out with me for a few minutes and letting me show you my prized possessions, or a few of them anyway. If you're heading back out into your busy day, then I hope that the rest of your day is as stress-free as it can be. And if you're heading off to bed, then I hope you have the most wonderful dreams in the world, and that you wake up feeling refreshed and ready to face the next day. Sweet dreams.